started. Welcome to Bring in the Pollinators. As I mentioned, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Suzanne Bontempo. I am the program manager for Our Water, Our World, as well as an IPM, Integrated Pest Management educator. And I've worked in the garden industry as a professional for, over 20 years. And gosh, dare I say over 25 years now. And I'm thrilled to talk to you today about bringing in the pollinators. So let's get started. We are going to go through slides for about 45 minutes. And then, as Rika mentioned, we'll have time at the end for a question and answer session. That will be where we spend all the time we need to answer your questions. What we're going to learn today is what is pollination. Simple as that. What is pollination? And then what makes a pollinator and why are they important? Why do pollinators matter? And then we're going to look at how we can welcome them into our gardens, how we can provide them with a safe shelter in our gardens and make them feel very welcome, as well as we're going to meet the pollinators, many of our common pollinators that we see every day when we're out in our gardens through the spring, summer, fall months, and even actually on sunny days like today. And then we'll talk about how to protect them. So what is pollination? Pollination is accidental reproduction. So a pollinator is something, such as a bee, that visits a flower to sip nectar for sugar or gather pollen. Pollen is going to be the protein, fat, or other nutrients that bee or other pollinator needs. The pollen grains are then transferred and dispersed among the other plants of the same species. This allows the plants to go to seed and then reproduce to create more plants. Bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds are probably the most familiar pollinators that we see. However, beetles, moths, a few flies, and wasps are also important pollinators that I will share with you in a moment. But even in tropical areas globally, we see bats and lizards, spiders, and even small mammals such as the honey possum providing their important pollinating services. It's very exciting. So we're going to go back to our science class from high school, and we're going to look at the anatomy of a flower. So pollination is when a pollinator, such as that bee, lands on one flower before flying to another. And the pollen from the first flower is then moved and transferred to the second flower. The bee visits the pollen or nectar, which supplies the bee with the nutrients it needs. The bee rubs against the stamen, which are the male parts. And then while feeding and getting pollen all over themselves, they then, as they go to the next flower, brush up against the stigma, the female parts. Pollination occurs. So very simple. However, probably one of the more important things that happens, because pollinators, why pollinators matter, is they are pollinating roughly 75% of all food crops globally and pollinating roughly 90% of all flowering plants all throughout the world. I will share that pollinators are essential for food production. Pollinators provide pollination services to over 180,000 different plant species and more than 1,200 crops. That means that our pollinators are responsible for bringing us 1 out of every 3 bites of food. Yes, very important. So without them, we would not have the smorgasbord that we are used to enjoying every day. When we talk money, pollinators add $217 billion to the global economy. Honeybees alone are responsible for between 1.2 and 5.4 billion dollars in agricultural productivity here in the United States. So without the action of pollinators, agriculture, the economies of agriculture, our food supply, and the surrounding landscapes would collapse. Very important. So we do need them. And then as far as for biodiversity, they're very essential for biodiversity because in addition to food, they are going to support healthy ecosystems that clean the air, that stabilize soils, and that are protected from severe weather and support other wildlife. Pollinators also sustain our ecosystems and produce our natural resources. So they contribute to the biodiversity substantially, a key measure, and they also mark the health of the ecosystem. So healthy ecosystems means that we are getting everything we need to live a very comfortable life. So why are the pollinators in decline? Well, this is a very complicated question to answer. However, some of the main points to look at is loss of habitat. And this loss of habitat can be due to agriculture, urban development, and even the local fires that we're faced with. We can also look at the introduction of non-native plant species that might lure pollinators away from native plant species, which might offer higher nutrients. More native plants are going to be more nutrient rich, whereas non-natives won't. So if we have more non-natives, we're actually not providing as much nutrition to our pollinators. Climate change, this is a big one also. Pollinators, well, as we are faced with climate change, there's a number of things that happen through times of drought. Plants are going to try to hold on to their resources. They're going to perhaps not flower as abundantly, or maybe not at all. They might wait to flower until a better time, and understand insects are going to emerge during their own cycle. And oftentimes, heat is not always going to, their timing isn't always going to line up then with the flowers. So if they're emerging and they're looking for pollen and nectar, and those flowers are not available, they're going to starve. Another thing to keep in mind as the temperatures warm, southern pollinators from southern areas are going to migrate north, which will displace other pollinators. And then another component to this is pests and diseases. So some of us have heard about the parasitic mites that affect bees. But they also bring pathogens such as the parasitic mite syndrome. And then there's also fungal parasites that threaten honeybees and their populations. So pests and diseases are also there impacting them. And then we have pesticide usage. So this might seem really obvious. However, understand that even according to the EPA's guidelines, so that means when we're reading the label of a pesticide and using it according to the label's instructions, many pesticides, including some of the eco-friendly pesticides, impact the bees, even when we're using them in accordance to the label. Understand that if the pesticides don't outright kill the bees, it can also impact the bees' ability to forage, to feed, to reproduce. So we really want to avoid pesticides at all costs. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. And then another item, another topic that we're looking at that we're seeing has a significant impact on our pollinators is pollution, such as the heavy metals, the diesel, synthetic fertilizers, specifically the nitrogen, fertilizers, evening light pollution, and this is just to name a few. So we really want to try to avoid all of those things that are going to really disrupt our pollinators. So let's look at how we can create an environment that really supports the pollinators and invites them into our gardens. We're going to provide food that is going to be primarily, one moment, please, native plants. We're going to try to favor native plants because native plants have been proven, the research is out there that they're providing higher nutrition for our beneficials. And we're also going to look at plants that can provide that basic food for our wildlife in the form of seeds, berries, nuts, fruits, nectar, sap, pollen, foliage, and so forth. So all parts of the plant we want to offer. We're also going to provide a safe place for, the pollinators and wildlife to raise their young. So wildlife needs resources. Our pollinators need resources to nest and reproduce, to rest, to relax, and to protect and nourish their young. This is very important. We also want to offer a sunny and safe location. So bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, other beneficial insects love a sunny spot that is relatively undisturbed by pets, specifically kitty cats. So when we are providing a safe, sunny location, let's consider a location that is not going to be disturbed necessarily by the cats that like to hunt these butterflies and hummingbirds. And then water. Water is very important to our pollinators. What I've learned, I witnessed during the times of drought when we have very warm, hot summers, I didn't consider that the pollinators would need some water. And then I witnessed a bee come over to a little standing pond of water and literally pick up a bead of water to take it back to its hive. And that's when it was a huge light bulb. So when we can provide a small, shallow dish that has pebbles in it, such as this picture here, the pebbles will act as a landing pad for our insects and other pollinators. They can land on it without drowning, and then they can access water, especially through the dry months, because they need this to survive. They need this for their offspring, for bathing, and just to thrive. And then practicing holistic and sustainable gardening, maintaining our gardens in natural ways to ensure that the soil, the air, the water stays healthy, clean, and free from poisons. And then shelter or cover. We want to provide dense shrubs and brambles, evergreens, and wooded areas around our garden. Now, we might have small gardens, but we can still leave a little messy corner that's on the edge of a planting bed. And that's going to be enough to provide cover for our pollinators during times of bad weather, or a place to hide from predators that are trying to hunt them. Okay, now let's talk about our pollinators. We're going to start with butterflies because I really love butterflies. I have to be honest, I really love all of our pollinators, but I just think butterflies are so beautiful, as I'm sure you do too. So there's more than 1,300 butterfly species native to California. Butterflies are very active during the day, and they will visit a variety of flowers. Butterflies will probe for nectar, So because of that, they really prefer a nice flat landing pad. So flowers that are in a cluster that are relatively flat, slightly domed, that have petals or wide leaves that they can land on is really going to benefit them, and they will really be rewarded with a lot of nectar. Another thing to understand is butterflies, because they know that they are prey, they will prefer to land on top of flowers as opposed to sideways. You're also going to notice that. Butterflies do not have good vision. I'm sorry, butterflies have very good vision, but they do not have a sense of smell. So fragrant flowers are not important, but abundance of flowers, brightly colored flowers, are what you're going to see butterflies attracted to. And something I'd like to share is that in the world of butterflies, we're looking at plants that are called hosts. Host plants for butterflies are going to be the plants that the butterfly is going to it's going to prefer for its nectar. And then the host plant for the caterpillar very well will be different. And this host plant is going to be the food for the caterpillar. So, for example, the milkweed is the host for the caterpillar of the monarch. Okay. Monarchs need our native milkweed plant, which is the narrowleaf milkweed or the showy milkweed. These are our native milkweeds, which we want to plant to attract the monarchs. The monarchs will lay their eggs on that plant. Those eggs will hatch, and the caterpillars will have a feeding frenzy. Now, we can have other plants in our garden, such as the asters, the mimulus, the scabiosa, as a nectar plant for the monarch, but they need to have milkweed to lay the eggs for the caterpillar, because the caterpillar is only going to eat the leaves from the milkweed plant. We want to avoid planting the non-native milkweed because it's going to interrupt the migration cycle. So please avoid planting the non-native. Another example is the Dutchman's pipe. That is a host plant for the pipe vine swallowtail butterfly. And so you can refer to different plant lists, such as on the Cal Native Plant Society's website, CalScape. And then also on the Marin Master Gardeners website, they have plant lists that will talk about the host plant for the butterfly as well as host plant for the caterpillar. So when we're wanting to attract butterflies, we need to plant both plants, the host plant for the butterfly as well as the caterpillar. Understand that when we see these little caterpillars on the plants, we want to protect them from predators whenever possible. So this is a dill plant with an early instar of the swallowtail caterpillar. And when we see them, it's nice just to drape a very light piece of tulle or light netting over the plant. We can even tent it over the plant so that it's not resting straight on the plant, so that the caterpillars can roam freely. And then when we see the chrysalis and they're about to emerge, we can then remove that netting. If we happen to, if the butterfly happens to emerge from the chrysalis before we remove the netting, it's okay. We'll just remove the netting at that point and release that butterfly. Also understand that the chrysalis, these caterpillars are very sneaky and they're very good at hiding the chrysalis. So we want to check the outdoor furniture for the chrysalis before we fold up that patio furniture and store it for the winter, or even, the other, umbrellas. That was the word I was trying to find. Umbrellas, patio coverings, anything that might be out there. We want to just inspect it a little bit before we just, throw it in the garage. And then something I like to share and remind you that the caterpillar's number one job is to eat. So we are creating a caterpillar nursery. We want to raise as many caterpillars as possible. And so when we plant the host plant for the caterpillars, we anxiously want to see these caterpillars out there, which means we also anxiously want to see the plants getting eaten. Okay. We want to learn which plants are going to be host plants and expect chewing damage. We really want to understand the plant, the life cycle of the plant, as well as the life cycle of the caterpillar, so that we can expect to see plant damage and we will avoid using pesticides. I want to share that one example is there is an eco-friendly pesticide out there that is known for, caterpillars. It's called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. However, though we might use it for pest caterpillars, such as the Buddleia budworm, understand we really want to properly identify that caterpillar before we go for a pesticide, because if we can't properly identify it, we very well could be killing something that's beneficial. And keying out caterpillars is not easy. All right, let's talk about moths. So there's more than 1,100,000 species of moths in the US. That's more than the birds and mammal species throughout North America combined. Moths will outnumber butterflies, which is their nearest relative, 10 to 1. And though most are viewed as an agricultural pest, many are important pollinators. So here we have a picture of a hummingbird moth, which is one of my most favorite. It's such a delight to see them. If any of you shop at the Sloat in Kentfield, you might have seen them. They always have a display garden in the back of the nursery where there's always a hummingbird moth show during the warm months of summer. So please stop by and have a look. But understand the caterpillar of this hummingbird moth is the tomato hornworm or tobacco hornworm, something that isn't desirable if we're trying to grow tomatoes, for instance. So that's when we might want to go for the BT. However, what I'd like to invite you to do is to protect that tomato hornworm, put it in an area where it can just eat tomatoes so it can complete its life cycle, so it can emerge as the hummingbird moth, because it is such an important pollinator. Understand that not all moths are daytime foragers. Some moths are actually going to prefer to be nocturnal. They are nocturnal foragers. So we also want to remember to plant flowering plants that are going to bloom at night, or they're going to be pale in color or white and have a very strong fragrance. So such as the night blooming jasmine, that cestrum is perfect for a lot of our nocturnal moths. Okay, now we're going to talk about social and solitary bees. This is a huge category, so I'm going to just take a moment to share some things with you. So together, the social and solitary bees are the largest group of pollinators throughout the world. There's over 20,000 known bee species globally. 4,000 of them are native to the United States. And out of that 4,000, 1,600 are identified as native to California. So that's almost half. Bees, the whole range of bees, are going to range in size from the smallest being just 2 millimeters to a kumquat-sized big guy, which is the carpenter bee. So it's very diverse. It's very exciting. I absolutely love the bees. And I have to share, since we're been home more often through COVID, spending more time in the garden, I've been able to see more native bees, which is just so exciting. Only a handful of the bees in the United States are non-native. This includes the European honeybee and the bumblebees. European honeybees were brought to the United States in the 1600s, so they're relatively new. I'm having some tongue twisting issues. 1.6 million colonies of honeybees are needed to pollinate California's 800,000 acres of almond trees. Honeybees will fly up to 4 miles from their hive to collect water, nectar, and pollen. And honeybees can visit 50 to 100 flowers during each collection trip. So honeybees are going to be very valuable, as we all know. However, understand that we don't have as much, there's not as much data on the non-native bees. This is where we are learning more every day about the habitat and the importance of the non-natives. So social bees, I'm going to talk a moment about the social bees, which include the honeybees and the bumblebees. They're known to make honey and wax within their hives. They are hive dwellers. These hives are ruled by a queen. The queens are going to be the largest in the hive. And the hive is totally reliant on the queen's health and her ability to lay healthy eggs. Okay, there's workers within the hives. The workers are female, and then there's drones, which are the males. And all of the bees within the hive have their own duties. So solitary bees, which are approximately 75% of all the bee species, are going to be solitary bees. This includes the leaf cutters, the diggers, the carpenter bees, the miners, the mason bees, among others. And these bees live alone. They are not in a hive. They do not swarm. They rarely sting. They're not aggressive. And they fly around from flower to flower to collect pollen and nectar for their eggs. Solitary bees find or make homes for themselves to lay eggs in. So roughly 70% of solitary bees are soil dwellers, such as in this illustration here, where the others are going to be wood dwellers. They'll use old beetle tunnels in wood, or they'll take advantage of reeds or bamboo canes to lay their eggs. Their eggs are laid in the tunnel, and then they're sealed off with food inside, so that when that egg hatches, it has some nutrition to enjoy as it goes through its life cycle to emerge as an adult. The mother bee does not return to care for the young bee, the pupa, once it emerges. So it's totally on its own. So that's very unique. Now, we can also see bees living in wood structures as a bee nesting block. And as I mentioned, reeds or canes or anything that's hollow. So the material that is used to seal off the eggs, you see in that lower picture, it's so cool to see the eggs and the little pupa. Leafcutter bees are going to seal off the cells with a piece of leaf. Mast bees will seal off the cells with like a clear waxy substance, and miner bees are going to use mud to seal off the cells. Once the egg is laid in the cell, it will go through its larval and pupal stages before it emerges, all the while eating all that food that was left for it. So kind of cool. And then it'll just complete the life cycle. Wasps. Wasps are extremely fascinating to me, and maybe one of my most, I'm most intrigued by the wasps, because there are so many species of wasps. They're going to be a very important pollinator. I've just recently learned actually by watching wasps come and collect pollen from the flowers in my garden. Um, they're going to range in sizes as very, very tiny, almost microscopic. They're much tinier than an aphid, all the way to quite sizable. Wasps are insects that are in the same family group as bees and ants. So they're related. And though the wasps are carnivorous and hunt for other insects or spiders, they also visit flowers for nectar because that nectar offers important nutrition for them. So they're going to, visit a variety of different types of flowers. And this is kind of cool. They don't have fur or hair on their bodies. Their bodies are always smooth. So the way they collect pollen is to store it internally in their crop instead of outside on their bodies. So it's kind of cool. Fun fact about wasps is that figs are pollinated by wasps. You may know that. But it is very important. It's the only way for figs to get pollinated is by the fig wasp. And they are responsible for pollinating almost 1,000 species of figs. So kind of cool, really exciting. I don't know. I just love learning about wasps. Flies. So flies are another pretty big category. Flies visit flowers to sip on the nectar as well. They carry pollen from one flower to the next incidentally. They're not really out there for pollination. They're just there to enjoy the nectar, but pollination happens to happen. People are aware that bees are important, but flies are the second most important pollinator to bees. So what I can share is that if you love chocolate, you want to thank flies for that because they are the primary pollinator of cacao. Flies also help to pollinate pears, apples, strawberries, cherries, plums, apricots, peaches, raspberries, blackberries, and so much more. So we want to consider that flies are beneficial. And a lot of times what we're seeing are syrphid flies. Syrphid flies are often referred to as flower flies, but they might look like a wasp or a bee, but they're actually a true fly. And we'll recognize them because they're also considered hoverflies because they'll fly up and they'll just buzz in a stable position, and then they will dart to one side or the next, similar to a helicopter. And that's where they get the nickname hoverfly. Syrphid flies, the family of syrphid flies contains more than 6,000 identified species. So there is a very large family, and they are incredible. Again, to very, very tiny to a nice size, maybe about a half an inch. And the adults are going to feed on the nectar and the pollen, and they live around the world except for Antarctica. Some of their favorite flowers are going to be yarrow, buckwheat, cilantro, and parsley. Beetles. Beetles were the first pollinators. They make up the largest group of pollinating animals because there's so many of them. They're responsible for pollinating 88% of the 240,000 flowering plants around the world. They are the first insect to visit flowers and remain essential pollinators today. I will share that it is noted that they are especially important in ancient species of plants such as magnolias. So they're on record for doing a lot of really great work through the centuries. Pictured here is a soldier beetle. This is one of the first beneficial insects to emerge in the spring. So not only are they foraging for pollen, but they're also doing a great job eating pest insects such as aphids. Hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are native only to the Americas. They are a delight. I think we all can say that we love them. They have really good eyesight, and they're attracted to brightly colored flowers. So they don't really need fragrance. So really it's color. And they need to eat several times their weight in nectar every day. So providing an abundance of nectar plants for them is really going to benefit the hummingbirds. They do also go for protein. They will also pick up insects through the garden, such as aphids, to feed their young when they have some little hatchlings in their nest. And wind. This is the sneaker. All the remaining percentages of the world's plants rely on wind for pollination. So we're looking at grasses such as the cereal crops and many trees. They are wind pollinated. So wind pollinated plants don't normally have flowers. They're not typically perfumed, have fragrance, or they have nectar. They just have a large amount of pollen, thus hay fever. So what is going on with the wind pollinated plants is that most of the world's most important crops are wind pollinated, including the cereal crops such as wheat, rice, corn, rye, barley, and oats. Nut trees such as walnuts, pecans, and pistachios are usually wind pollinated as well, and pines, spruces, firs, and other hardwoods. So wind also plays a very important part in the pollinating process. Okay, so those were the common pollinators that we see. So now let's look at how we can protect the pollinators. Pollinators will need some protection from predators, pets, children, and gardeners. We also want to consider protecting them from the elements, such as keeping an area of the garden uncultivated and mulch-free so that those soil dwellers can access soil without having to move through mulch. We're going to avoid leaf blowers. So if any of you have a gardener that comes with their leaf blower, tell them to stop, because the leaf blower disrupts the habitat, the little nooks and crannies that our pollinators might be nesting in. We're going to prune mindfully. We really want to observe our trees and shrubs and some of our perennials and see, are birds going into those plants? Because they could be going into those plants for cover. They could be going into those plants to feed on either the little insects that are in there, such as the aphids, or they could be feeding on the seeds that the plant has produced. So they also could be nesting. So if we just go in there and start, cutting back a shrub, we might be disrupting a habitat for someone that's been using that plant. As I mentioned, we also want to check the patio furniture before storing. And then at all costs, we want to avoid the pesticides. I'm going to be saying that a few more times because that might be one of the most important things that we learned today. So tips for attracting pollinators. We want to find a way to provide year-round blooms. We want to embrace the seasons. We live in an area that we can actually have something flowering almost every day of the year. Our goal is to have a continuously blooming garden. And it doesn't mean the whole garden needs to be in bloom. What I mean is just having something right now in bloom. So right now, what I have in bloom is borage. Everything else is very dormant. There isn't a lot out there. However, borage is blooming, and on warm days, the bees are swarming it. So I just want to make sure that I have something that is going to offer nutrients for our pollinators on those warm days when they're out foraging through the winter months. Um, we want to favor California natives. We want to favor them because they are going to be specific to our native pollinators, offering them the nutrition that the native pollinators need. So that's going to be really important. We are going to go big. We're going to plant in swaths or clumps of about 3 by 3. Now, if you have a large perennial, such as the Mexican sunflower, the Tithonia, it kind of gets to be 3 by 3 at maximum growth. So just planting one of those is fine. However, if we have, like the California native buckwheat, for instance, we might want to plant in swaths or have multiple clumps, just so that there is an abundance of flowers for the pollinators when they come. Then we want to avoid hybrid plants. Hybrid plants often times do not provide the pollen, the nectar, or the fragrance that the non-hybrids do. And the pollen, the nectar, and the is really important to our beneficials, pollinators. And then don't forget to include a few night blooming plants or those light colors that are fragrant for our nocturnal pollinators. And then remember, we want to include the larval host so that the adults are welcome and know that their young will thrive. We want to consider reducing or removing the lawn, because lawns are not very nutrient rich or provide enough benefits to our pollinators. And then providing a water source. Now, something else I want to share in regards to providing the water source is we want to, through the rainy season, what I've noticed is sometimes a little bucket or a saucer gets filled with water a little too deep, and then I go out and I see that a pollinator has drowned. So I'm very mindful that I'm dumping out water, because I also don't want to be a vector for a mosquito outbreak. I'm dumping out water that might cause pollinators to drown. But then I'm also providing water sources where those landing pads that I mentioned before, having little pebbles, rocks from the garden inside the water source so that they can enjoy water safely. And then, of course, we want to avoid pesticides and even the eco-friendly ones. There are so many amazing California native plants. And the research has found that California native plants provide higher nutrition to our pollinators. That's the beneficial insects and the birds and the overall ecology of the garden. So we want to choose climate appropriate natives that thrive in our gardens. They will be better adapted to our soil types, to our specific microclimates, to our annual rain precipitation, and specific to our very own local pollinators. We want to plant a variety, a diversity of flowering plants that provide nectar and pollen. We want to include a variety of colors, shapes, sizes, heights, all types of plants, such as perennials, shrubs, trees. We want to have a variety. And again, remember, fragrance is not necessarily going to be important, but color and variety, diversity is. So here, there are many plant lists out there. I know you're all getting a resource page after the program that is going to have a wealth of resources with plant lists, including the UC Marin Master Gardeners website. But just so you get an idea, we want to plant a variety of flowers that look like a daisy or a sunflower. And the reason why is because the petals are actually the rays. That's what the insect sees. Whereas that little yellow dome in the middle, those are actually the hundreds of little tiny flowers. So in the case of the butterfly, they can land on top of those petals and then access all of the nectar in this center flowers. We also want to favor flowers that grow in clusters of tiny flowers, such as ceanothus or yarrow, because this, again, since so many of our pollinators are tiny, they're really going to favor small flowers. And when we have small flowers in a cluster, these pollinators are getting the most bang for their buck. And then we're going to plant small and large tubular flowers, because larger butterflies and hummingbirds are going to prefer the tubular flowers for their the way they access the nectar. This is just a variety of some flowers that I have throughout my garden that are going to be ideal. We have the Kniphofia, which is the top left corner, which is going to be ideal for hummingbirds. Then we move to the Agastache, which is great for the butterflies, hummingbirds, and even when the flowers are more open, I see the bumblebees and carpenter bees on it. The Cestrum, which is excellent for the moths and the hummingbirds. We have the snapdragons, again, excellent for the hummingbirds and larger butterflies. In the middle, we have the verbena, and we also have the abutilon. These are going to be excellent for butterflies. Verbena is excellent for the butterflies. The abutilon is excellent for the hummingbirds, as well as some of the bees. I've seen bees go in there and enjoy. The bottom left corner is the scabiosa, which is phenomenal for all the pollinators. I've seen everybody on there. Then we have hemlock, which is a weed, or kind of a weed. I didn't have a good picture of any of the pollinators on Queen Anne's lace or cilantro flowers or parsley flowers. So I pulled this up because here we have a beetle. It's a lady beetle enjoying the pollen. Then we, of course, have another verbena, and in the lower right corner is that Mexican sunflower, the Tithonia, which is the perfect example of how the butterflies like to land and enjoy that nectar. All right, let's look at the habitat heroes. So there are some plants that are just going to be notable for the abundance that they are able to provide for a significant number and variety of pollinators, as well as the wildlife and the entire ecology of our gardens. So if you really are going to plant nothing else, choose one of these just to add to your garden, and you will see that your garden will just flourish. So we have the buckwheat, the manzanita, we have California native oaks, we have the California lilac or ceanothus, sages, pretty much the entire family of sages, and culinary herbs. Culinary herbs are amazing. I always let mine go to flower, thyme, the oregano, the dill, parsley, cilantro. And when we see them in flower, especially the parsley, the cilantro, and the dill, we see the micropollinators, those little ones, the little beneficial flies and wasps just swarming it. It's so exciting. And then I'd like to invite you to consider letting the plants complete their life cycle, because oftentimes the life cycle is going to offer more than just the nutrition from the pollination. I'm sorry, the nutrition from the nectar and the pollen through the flowering stage. So in the top left corner is the seeds from the aster. The aster that's in the backdrop of my screen is now, this is what's happening right now. It is in seed form, and there are birds that are swarming that plant every day collecting seeds, and they also can very well be collecting the fluff for their nests. The Japanese anemone and the clematis or clematis, those are also going to be wonderful for nesting materials. Berries, we have the elderberry and the snowberry, as well as acorns. These are all going to provide nutrients for birds and the rest of the garden food chain. Something else I'd like to point out when we talk about oaks as being one of the most important plants for our landscape ecology, a lot of these plants will attract pests, or what we might view as pests, such as with the oaks. They have a oak moth that is there's different varieties, different species of oak moths that are their caterpillar we might view as a pest because it's eating the leaves of the oak. Trust me, the oak can handle it. It's not a problem. We want to allow the oak moths, those larvae, to be there because now it's food for the songbirds. It's food for the other benefits, the woodpeckers, the jays, and so forth. So we really want to understand that all parts of the plant are going to benefit the ecology of the garden, even if we might see it as a pest. Plants for the pollinators, there is going to be a lot of resources, as I mentioned, that are going to provide you with abundance of resources. The UC Marin Master Gardeners, California Native Plant Society, specifically the Cowscape website, and then a couple great brochures on the Our Water, Our World website. What I want to most importantly share, since I've talked about it so much, is that pesticides, when we use them, we have to understand they don't solve the pest problem. If we are not addressing the cause of the problem, then we are not solving the problem, and pesticides are not going to solve the problem either. So we really want to understand what's causing the problem and address that. Now, I can share that aphids are going to come every year, but if we really have nice balance in our garden, meaning that there are beneficial insects that are welcome, that keeps those aphids in balance, understand aphids are food for the beneficial insects and the birds. So we want to have some. It's okay. We don't have to freak out if we see some aphids on our rows or whatever. So understand really what we see as a pest is often food for other most important critters in our garden. And really, really, please understand, we want to look out for products that contain the neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids, or neonics, are a systemic pesticide that are applied either as a soil drench with the watering can or as a spray. The pesticide is then taken into the plant through its vascular system and all of the cells of the plant, including the nectar and the pollen. These pesticides are going to stay in the plant for a very long time, in fact, years. So even though it might say it protects up to 6 weeks or it protects up to 12 months, know that that's at full strength, and that over time, the pesticide is still in the plant, but at a weaker strength. And so because of it's at a weaker strength, the label, it cannot guarantee that it's still going to kill the pest. So that's why it is only mentioning the shortest amount of time that it is in that plant at full strength. Also understand, when we apply the pesticide to the plant, it's not just staying in it's not only affecting that plant, it's going through the root system as well. And if the root system is spreading out, as plants do, those roots do grow really far. It could be, connecting with roots of other plants and transferring the pesticide to it. Whereas then now that pesticide, if this, let's say, for instance, we border a wild space, an open space, if the roots of our roses, if we've treated roses or if we've treated a tree with this pesticide, come in contact with wildflowers in that open space, now those wildflowers are affected. they are holding on to this pesticide, and any pollinators that come and feed off of it are also going to be impacted. So a couple of things to understand. We want to support the nurseries and the retail outlets that are not selling plants that are treated with the neonics. So we can give yourself permission. We get to ask, where we buy plants. Are you treating your plants with neonicotinoids? Are you buying from suppliers that have treated plants with neonics? Now, what I can share is that there are growers throughout California that our local nurseries buy from that do not treat with neonics. So a nursery might bring in plants that are neonic free, and then other plant stock might be treated. So what we're going to do is we're going to be a little flexible and open-minded, and we're going to support those retailers that bring in plants that are neonic free, and we're really just going to buy those plants. Now, something to understand is that at this moment in time, some plants are required as a preventative mean to be treated, such as citrus. So right now, to protect our most incredible citrus industry here in California, we all love our citrus. Plants are treated to prevent the Asian citrus psyllid that has entered the state. So if we're buying citrus, as I have done, I know that my plant is treated, and I know it's been treated with a neonic, and I know that neonic is going to be in that plant for a couple of years. So during that time, I'm just removing the flowers. I'm removing the flowers so that plant can still grow, but bees and other pollinators will not come and feed off of it. Okay, so for more information, you can check out these resources, which will also be on that resource page. All right, so let's talk a little bit as we finish up about protecting the pollinators with integrated pest management. So integrated pest management is understand that identification is the key. We want to set our garden up for success, and then we want to eliminate pesticide usage, and we can do all of that with integrated pest management. So integrated pest management, or IPM, is a decision-making process. It uses science-based strategies to solve the problems, to address the problems and to solve them. We're going to look at the garden as a whole system, and we're going to start to ask a few questions when we see something that doesn't look right. We're going to ask, what is the problem at hand? What really is the problem? Or is this a symptom of the problem? And then once we can identify the problem, we want to ask ourselves, is this something we can live with? Or do we know that it's part of a cycle and that it's going to correct itself? Integrated pest management looks at prevention. We want to do whatever we can to prevent the problems from happening. Identification is the key. And then when we do have a pest that we've properly identified, we take some steps. In IPM, they're called action steps, and these action steps are called controls. So cultural controls, which I'll share in a moment, is really increasing the health of the garden to favor the good bugs. We're going to favor the plants, the good bugs, the pollinators, and we're actually going to make the garden less favorable to the pests. We're going to use mechanical controls, the traps, the barriers, the tools to manage pests. We're going to use biological controls, which are living organisms such as beneficial insects, to manage pests. And chemical controls are part of an IPM program. However, we always want to use these as a last resort. And we also want to consider just removing the plant if it just is always a problem for us. As I mentioned, proper identification is key. If we cannot identify the pest, then we cannot solve the problem. We want to understand the life cycle of that pest, because oftentimes it's very short-lived and the problem is going to correct itself. We want to understand that pest's habit and timing of action so that we can prevent it from coming next time. And then we also want to understand who are the natural enemies, who are the beneficial insects that want to feed on these pests, and are they present? Because if they are, let's just let them take care of it. We want to set our gardens up for success. We're going to consider all of the aspects of our garden, all the characteristics. So we want to amend the soil, increase the health of the soil with compost. We're going to feed that soil and our plants with organic fertilizers. Okay. We're going to protect the soil with mulch, but we're going to leave a section of the soil bare and uncultivated. Okay. But we do want to protect the soil with mulch around the root zones of many of the plants because they will benefit from that. We're going to plant the right plant in the right place according to our microclimate and plant climate appropriate plants. Okay. We're going to water deeply and less often as that plant grows. And remember, it could take 1 to 5 years for plants to become established. So during that time, we are going to really try to expand and grow healthy root systems. And we're going to practice healthy garden maintenance, okay? And then because it always comes back down to the pesticides, sometimes we do need to use them, but we want to really understand those unintended consequences. I mean, really understand how the active ingredient works and what that mode of action of that active ingredient is. We always want to use it as the last resort, and we really need to read the label and understand how to use it properly. Because when we're using it properly, we are, it is not going to be as detrimental to our garden. We want to know our pest and only target that pest. We are not spraying down the whole garden just because we saw aphids on one rose. We are going to spot apply, okay? We are going to choose eco-friendly and less toxic pesticides. We're going to apply these pesticides at the end of the day, well after sunset, when there's still light outside, because this is when our pollinators are less likely to be active. And then we are going to avoid spraying or applying pesticides to trees, shrubs, and perennials when they're in bloom. UCIPM has this really great resource called Bee Precaution Pesticide Rating. Check it out. It's going to talk about how the pesticides and their toxicity levels, how they are affect pollinators and how they're rated. Other online resources are going to be, of course, the Our Water, Our World website. UCIPM has a wealth of information. OMRI, the Organic Materials Review Institute, has a list of eco-friendly pesticides. And the National Pesticide Information Center is going to have very consumer-friendly, easy to understand information on how the actives work. So please utilize these resources when we have to use a pesticide. And then, of course, the UC Marin Master Gardeners it's just a wealth of information. They have so much amazing information on how to grow healthy plants, how to protect our pollinators and plants for pollinators. So please check it out. And then more fun resources that are going to be on that list that gets emailed out to you is the Xerces Society, the National Wildlife Federation, North American Bay Butterfly Association, Bay Nature Institute, and the Butterfly and Moths of North America website. These are all really fun resources that talk about butterfly counts or programs and exercises to do with children, plant lists, and so forth. So please get involved and have fun with it. So as we close, I just want to share, when we pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Everything is connected. So please, when we, I guess my takeaway is to please, we don't need the pesticides. I want to thank you all for joining us. I do believe I went a little longer than 45 minutes, so I apologize, but let's answer some questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Suzanne. That was a fantastic presentation, and I love the last image of how tiny that fly is. wasp is. But let me just say for everyone that this was a lot of information, obviously. And yes, you will be able to get a link to the video when it's ready, and we'll send that out as Suzanne mentioned. But with that, let me invite you to add your questions or comments in the chat. And Suzanne, I'll start us off with a couple that are already in front of us. The first is from Susan, and she said early on in the presentation, when you were talking about planting a swath of flowers, do you mean a swath of the same kind of flower or diverse flowers, especially for people with smaller yards?
Oh, thank you for that clarification. And I'm so sorry. That's a great question. Yes, we do want to try to favor larger blocks of the same flowering plants. So I know it's not always easy with smaller gardens. So trust me, it doesn't have to be, a 3x3 space. You can have a half barrel or a large container that is a, pollinator, a variety of flowers for pollinators that will absolutely attract them. But for those of us that have a little bit more space, when we can do smaller swaths or, sections of the same plant, roughly 3x3, that's going to just benefit them a little bit more. But it's not necessary, but only when we can.
That's fantastic. And just a quick reminder, also in the chat is a quick link to a short evaluation survey that helps all of our nonprofit groups show what we're doing as we go out and look for support. And also just a reminder too, if you're having trouble or prefer not to use the chat function, just please unmute yourself. You have that capability, and we can take questions that way as well. Before I turn to the other questions, let me also just remind you of what my colleague Tracy put in the chat, which is the details about our next seminars upcoming, which is Managing Rats on Tuesday, February 15th. So with that, let me turn back to the questions and a quick comment from Mary, who said she's really happy she planted natives and she got rid of her lawn 5 years ago. And a shout out for the Watershed Nursery in Richmond. And I'll just add, I'm in the process of getting rid of my lawn, which is a topic coming up. And the Marin Municipal Water District has a program to help support that decision here in Marin. The next question we have is from Judith, Suzanne, and she's asking if neem oil is a problem for pollinators.
Oh, thank you for asking that question. That is a really good question that gets asked a lot. Neem is a very, let's just say it's very unique. It is a botanical pesticide. It comes from the oils of the nut of the neem tree. It is very unique that it's broad spectrum, which means it is going to manage insect pests, fungal diseases, and mite pests, so spider mites. And it will also kill a number of pests. It's got a very long list of pests that it kills. Now, neem, sadly, is not only going to kill what we see as a pest, but it's also going to impact any other insect that's out in the garden. When we spray or apply a pesticide such as neem or any eco-friendly, if pollinators or beneficial insects are present, they're going to be impacted. Once the neem once any of the eco-friendlies are dry, once they've dried on the plant and are no longer wet, they are going to be less impactful for our pollinators and beneficial insects. And they do break down very quickly in the environment, and they do not pose a threat to water quality. However, it is really hard to see a lot of the micropollinators, which are very tiny, or even their eggs or the larval. And it's really hard to identify the larval of these little pollinators, specifically the hoverfly or syrphid fly. It is a little tiny caterpillar or like worm that is feeding on aphids, oftentimes on the roses. And a lot of times we'll just wipe it off because we think it might be, something else, a pest. So just again, identification is key. It's not always easy. I'm absolutely here to help support you. You can always find my email at plantharmony.org. You can also go to the UCIPM and try to key out. If you can identify the plant, you're halfway there, because at the UCIPM website, one of the ways you can search is by identifying the plant, entering the name of the plant. And from there, all of the problems that plant is faced with in our area will come up, and that also helps us.
That is great. We have two other questions. One from Donna asking, how do we plant in shaded gardens, or any recommendations?
Yes. Shaded gardens. There are, let me ask you this. Is it full dark shade, or is it bright shade? Is it part shade, part sun? That will dictate this a little bit, but you can absolutely go to your local garden center and you'll find shrubs like the Arctophilus or the Manzanita, ribes, spireas, ceanothus, berberis. There's a lot of plants that actually are going to thrive and grow really well in the shade that are going to also be nectar and pollen plants.
Great. And Donna added it's partial sun.
Yeah. Oh, then you've got even more to choose from. So yeah.
Great. And Rita was asking if all sages or salvias are native.
No, not all sages are native. So knowing what the species is, doing a little research, the Sunset Western Garden Book, the CalScapes, California Native Plant Society, and the UC Master Gardeners will all have that information and resources for you.
Great, great. And Ron has a question about if there are sources to purchase beneficials other than praying mantises and ladybugs.
There's a really great resource for to learn more about beneficial insects and for purchasing. It is an insectary that's in Ventura. It's called Rincon Vitova. So Rincon, RINCON, Rincon Vitova, VITOV, right? Is that right? Vitova. I'm not good at spelling bees, saying things out loud. So we'll put that in the resource page.
That's great. And we have a comment and a question from Jeanette. She was saying she was at a recent Xerces workshop and the presenter shared information about native bumblebees to the Western US. And while they may have misheard, they're looking for clarifications because because you mentioned European honeybees and bumblebees are not native.
I apologize. Yeah.
But yeah, and just to clarify, what a number of bumblebees that are native. So
yeah, no, the bumblebees and the European honeybees are social bees. They have hives. So then from there, the bumblebees are native, whereas the European honeybee isn't. So that's where, though they're both social, only one is a native and one is not. So I apologize. I know I was a little clumsy through the program, having a hard time finding my flow, but thank you. I do apologize, and thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, no, and I was fascinated by the distinction with social and non-social. So yeah, we packed a lot of information into this presentation. And so I'm glad we'll be able to provide not only the resources we've been talking about, but a video as well. I think that is all of the questions we have at the moment. Yep. And Ron posted the link to the insectary you mentioned.
Great.
And
thank you,
several
Ron.
people are saying thank you, and they're off to do some shopping. But we really appreciate you all joining us. And I'll just remind you, please take a moment. It's a super short evaluation, but just take a moment to click that link that was shared in the chat to help us with feedback on this presentation. And sorry, there was one other question that's pretty specific, but let me see if we can get an answer to that. And that was from Paul about research. And his question was, research shows that global climate change has not yet caused plant and pollinator desynchronizations, and they refer to some Colorado studies. They may bloom sooner, but the pollinators servicing them appear to parallel their presentation. Do you know of any published research to the contrary?
No, that's just a risk that when we talk about climate change, that's something that entomologists are worried about. That's a concern. So I'm happy to see that the research is showing that it hasn't started yet, but it's something to consider. But more so, what's important, or I would like to clarify, is that when plants are drought stressed, they're not going to bloom as abundantly as they normally would. So that's going to reduce the pollen and nectar for the natives pollinators. And when the native pollinators don't have enough food and nutrition, then they're not going to be breeding as abundantly. So that's really, I think, a more current, relevant takeaway.
Yeah. And thank you, Tracy, for pulling that question back in front of us. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think that, that is part of the reason that our three organizations are collaborating. It's not just about, as Suzanne said, everything is connected. So it's not just about the choices we're making in our own yards because of our own yards. It's what every small thing we do can affect not just small things. So we really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today, and not only taking care of your own yards and gardens, but I'm guessing a lot of people on this webinar are also involved in helping take care of some of our public spaces. And we're very lucky to have such rich resources and natural resources around us to enjoy with open public spaces. And so I just thank all of you and remind you of great resources in Our Water, Our World, UC Marin Master Gardeners, and Yard Smart Marin, and welcome your questions and follow up. And we'll be sending an email with all of these resources and a video link when it's ready. Hope to see you all in our next two webinars on February 15th about controlling rodents without rodenticides and poisons, and rethinking your lawn on March 5th. So take a moment, fill out that survey, and we look forward to following up by email. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
And Suzanne, thank you. It was a fantastic presentation, and we really appreciate all of your hard work to bring this resource to us, and also to our friends at UC Marin Master Gardeners for providing the technical support and editing this video.
Thank you
all. Go enjoy the gorgeous day.